Welcome to your value project, where we'll be learning about the medium of charcoal. So charcoal is one of the oldest materials that people have used to draw. It's really just burned wood, which you can see how someone could pick that up out of a fire and realize you can make a mark with it. It's made from usually willow vines or twigs, and it's fired in a kiln, which is like how you make pottery. So it's really sealed and a really hot oven, basically. It creates a very, very dark line, and it can be soft. It comes in all different softnesses or hardnesses, and it can create a lot of different shades and tones, which is why we're using it to create value. Values just interchangeable with shading and toning. So charcoal does, if you've ever used it before, you know this very well, it does shed off the paper really easily, like it's loose on the surface of the paper. So in order to keep the drawing, if you want to keep it around, you have to preserve it with fixative, and fixative is super toxic. So if you're going to use them, if you want to keep these drawings, you need to spray it outside and using a mask. Some places, like some art studios, will have a big fan and like a fixative box you can use. But unless you have some kind of extreme ventilation like that, please, please, please do it outside. Okay, so we're going to talk about contrast and how the lighting in your drawing is going to affect the contrast in your drawing. So we're going to be talking about both high and low contrast. So a high contrast is there's a big range between lights and darks. I'll show you examples of these. And low contrast is there's not a lot of difference between the lights and darks. So everything in the drawing is kind of like a similar tone. So it can be either really, really dark or really light or all mid-tones. And then also when you're setting up things to draw, because if you're drawing from life, you're creating a setup, you're thinking about your lighting. So we can talk about high key and low key lighting. Now, to make this a little confusing, it's like the opposite of the high contrast in the actual drawing. So high key lighting is less contrast, and it's usually like used with bright lighting, like think of commercials on TV, or like a comedy would always be in really bright lighting with not a lot of shadows. And then low key lighting is usually more contrast, and it's usually considered mostly in shadow. Don't worry, we'll look at examples so you can start to understand all of this. So this is Heather Hansen. Again, anytime there's an underline, there's a link to more information about the artist. So please, take a look at this. You can download it in the project where the video is. This is an American artist who's still living. What she does is she creates these charcoal drawings where she's like, it almost looks like she's doing yoga. It really does look like yoga, but then they come out as these like abstract drawings, and the performance is part of it. There's a video of her process that I linked to. So you can see an example of a high contrast when it's on the black charcoal on the white background. So that's like the darkest black against the whitest white on the white background. And then you can see on the picture where it's actually a photo of her, above her is a really low contrast drawing where it's the dark charcoal on black paper. So there's not a lot of difference between the dark and lights in that drawing. So I think low contrast can be really interesting too. This is Odilon Radon. Okay, excuse me. I have to apologize in advance for my pronunciation. I grew up outside of a suburb of New York City, and it's just one of the worst accents, and my mouth can't make certain, with French and Italian and Spanish names, my accent just comes out terrible. So I'm so sorry if I'm offending anyone with my terrible accent. But he was a French artist, and this is called The Window. It's pastel and charcoal. Pastel is very similar to charcoal, where it's like chalky. And we can see that this is the low key lighting. Everything's really in shadow. And what it does is it makes it super dramatic. So that's what I want you to start noticing about these images. Like, is it giving you different emotions? Is it bringing up different feelings? Like, what does this kind of lighting and the contrast do when you look at the artwork? This is Kara Walker, an American artist who's still living. She's a very important artist of our time, and I've been lucky enough to see some of these in person, and they're incredible and really emotional and intense. So there are these silhouettes that she creates by drawing on this like dark black photo paper. So it's like black paper, and then it's mounted in the wall in a gallery of a museum. So when you walk into the room, you're surrounded by these silhouettes. And this kind of silhouette you may have seen is like a really traditional medium that people use before photography. They'd get one of these silhouettes. So she's using these traditional medium to talk about racism and slavery in America. She's an African American artist. So she's representing all of this violence and these horrible things in a really traditional medium. So I think there's like this juxtaposition between the medium, the silhouette, and the content, what these images are depicting. This is a quote from Kara Walker, which I got paraphrased most of this from her website, but this is a direct quote. Kara Walker says, "I decided if I'm going to delve into race and racism, as was expected of me as an African American artist, I was going to pull out all the stops." So she's not apologizing for these images. She's making stuff that's very raw and very intense. And they're calling it uncivil Civil War reenactments. This is very high contrast. This is pretty much as high contrast as you can get. The black is black against the whitest white of the wall. And please take a look at Kara Walker's website. She's still working today as a working artist. She's a really good example of a bold, brave artist going out there and making a statement and then having this great career in the art world and really making an impact. This is Junji Ito, also a living artist. He's Japanese. Any comic book fans might recognize this. It's from the Uzumaki. Again, apologies for my pronunciation, but it's a spiral manga comic. He's a horror manga artist. This is from 1998. So this is a horror story. If you're a comic book enthusiast and you haven't read this, I highly, highly recommend taking a look at this. The drawing is just insane, and the story is so great. So how does Junji Ito use this really high contrast to help tell the horror story? I think high contrast can be super intense, and we see how dark these lines are. They're these really like bold, dark lines, the same way Kara Walker is super bold in the line work. There's no room for error or mistake. We know she is confident. She's confidently putting these images down. Junji Ito is also really high contrast, but a lot more detail in there that we're seeing. So I just want you to start looking at art and developing, what your taste is. And even if it's something that you don't like, or if horror is not your thing, comic books aren't your thing, think about what you can still learn from this image and try to look at things maybe you wouldn't have liked before in a different way. Okay, so chiaroscuro. This is an Italian word meaning light and dark. It's a very common art term. It's one you definitely need to learn when you take an art class. So it's really used for drama. It's the drama. The effects of the darks and lights are contrasted. So it's creating this intensity, that contrast. And it's also used to create volume. Volume is basically making something look three-dimensional on a two-dimensional surface. So that's what we're going to be doing this week, is we're going to be using shading to make things look volumetric, to make things look three-dimensional on a piece of paper that's only two-dimensional. That is the illusion, right? The beauty of art. So this is Leonardo. Here we go with the Ninja Turtles. He was Italian. And this is a chalk drawing. It is an enormous drawing. It's like 55 by 41 inches. I've also been lucky enough to see this in real life, and it's intense in a different way than the Kara Walker stuff. It's really subtle and beautiful. And also because it's charcoal and chalk on paper, like we talked about how you have to, it's kind of a delicate medium. These kinds of drawings are preserved by being in like a dark room in a museum and behind a lot of glass. So it's like always kind of quiet and dark when you view some of these chalk or charcoal in a museum. So this is the Virgin and Child with Saint Anne and the infant John the Baptist. It's also known as the Burlington House cartoon. What I really want you to notice about this, and what Leonardo is known for, one of the most famous artists, right? For the volume that he created with the drapery. So take a look at all the fabric on their legs. I mean, it's just beautifully drawn. I also love that Mary's foot is not fully drawn on the bottom. So we're like seeing how Leonardo da Vinci is sketching, and it seems unfinished. There's also a hand that's unfinished. And I love seeing that, how the artist's mind works and when things aren't, perfectly finished. So paper at this time was not made this big. And so what Leonardo did is put a lot of different pieces of paper together. You can see some of the lines, and then mounted it on canvas. This is the only existing large scale drawing that we have by Leonardo. So it's really a special one that comes up in art history a lot. It was also called a cartoon. We looked at Junji Ito's comic books, and the cartoons of this time, right? This is in the 1500s, or 1499 to 1500 is when they think that this was created. So cartoons during this time were the drawings made before a painting. So it's like the practice drawing for a painting. There is no painting exactly like this. So Leonardo could have also just made it to be a drawing. So look at all of the volume created both in the drapery, the fabric, and then in the figures, especially like in the arms of the baby and the head. All that subtle shading is creating volume. It's the chiaroscuro of the dark and against the light. So the lights pop forward and then the darks recede back. So the darks go into shadow and make it look like that part is moving away from us, where the light pops out and makes it look like it's coming towards us. And that's how we get that 3D effect created. This is Sargent Claude Johnson, an American artist, not still living. He died in 1967. This is called Mother and Child. And I just think it's nice to look at these mother and child themes. It's a big theme in art. The difference, Leonardo is doing the same kind of imagery, the mother holding and embracing the child. And I want you to notice the chiaroscuro and the volume created here too. It's a very different style. These figures are more what I would call stylized figures. They're not as like realistic looking as Leonardo's, but we know that Sargent Claude Johnson was influenced by African and Mexican traditional art. And I can see the influence of like an African sculpture or a Mexican sculpture that's maybe a little more like flattened and rounded. And then that combined with the chiaroscuro, the volume created with this shading, I think creates a really interesting image. Johnson was known for his sculpture, but he studied a lot of different types of art. He's an African-American artist. He considered himself African-American. His father was Swedish and his mother was Cherokee and African-American. He has a lot of themes of mother and child throughout his career. If you look into him on the links I'm providing, you can see a lot of mother and child sculptures that Johnson created, and his life is really interesting. He was orphaned in 1902 and he moved between a lot of foster homes and families and had to go to boarding school. He also was part of the Federal Arts Project. in the 1930s during the Great Depression, when the government was paying for these large-scale murals and public sculptures to be created to give people jobs and get people working. So that link I'm giving you is to a video where you can hear Johnson talking about his process in creating a mural. He was also a graphic artist, so super prolific artist that gave us a lot of great imagery to study and look at. This is Kath Kollwitz, a German artist. She passed in 1945. This is her self-portrait done in 1910. It's charcoal. It's all charcoal, which is what we're going to be using. I also like with this, similar to the foot and hand in the Leonardo drawing, we can see her testing out the charcoal. And for your sketch for this project, you're going to be practicing different values with the charcoal, and you can see how Kollwitz is doing this on the side of her paper. So she had a really intense life in Germany. She lost her son in World War I and then her grandson in World War II. After her son died in World War I, she was a very vocal anti-war artist, and she made posters and artwork against the wars. She was very successful in her time internationally, and in the US she was well known and was showing her work, and she was vocally anti-Nazi. So when the Nazi regime rose, her and her husband both had to leave Germany because they were, fighting against the war and protesting against the Nazis, and she was threatened that she was going to be detained in a concentration camp for supporting Jewish people and Jewish artists. There's, I think, 2 museums of her work in Germany, and here's a quote about her. They say that for her younger fellow artists, she came to epitomize integrity and perseverance. She really paved the way for people to stand up to, Nazis or people doing things that are wrong. And she also used her artwork as an outlet, I think. I mean, obviously I don't know her, but it seems like her work is an outlet for all of this pain and emotion. She explored a lot of themes of loss and pain. And I want you to think about how she uses the chiaroscuro to depict emotion, how this high contrast intensity, one side of her face is completely in shadow and the other is in highlight, and we only see really the detail of one eye. I think this portrait is so intense. She's staring into our souls, and we can see that she is a person maybe carrying a heavy burden, or she's gone through some stuff, right, in her life. So how does the use of the dark and light, the chiaroscuro, depict this emotion? Here's another Kath Kollwitz. This is an example that she did of a poster. It's made with lithograph, which is a printing technique. Kath Kollwitz was really all about making affordable art too. So she made a lot of prints and drawings so that the artwork wasn't out of reach for an everyday person to purchase. And she made these posters that were printed and hung up. It's called a survivor's poster, and it's an anti-war poster, which she made a lot of. And we can see, again, the high contrast. We can see the pain and the hollowness in this people's eyes. We also have the theme of mother and children, or, guardian and children, of a female figure caring for and holding their child. And it's a really common theme in art. It's emotional, and this dark, and light, I think, is bringing us into the scene, and we're really feeling the emotion of these people. This is Reginald Gammon. This is an oil on canvas, which I know is a different medium, but has a lot of high contrast and chiaroscuro, and it's creating both volume and emotion. These characters are a little stylized, like the Johnson mother and child character, but they have a little more volume, and it's really bringing us into the scene. These are the Scottsboro Mothers. This is the name of the painting. It was done in 1970, and he was looking back at this incident that happened in Alabama in the 1930s, where they were called the Scottsboro Boys. Some 9 young African men young men were wrongly accused of assaulting a white woman in 1930s Alabama. And the mothers went to Washington, D.C. and lobbied for their children's innocence. Eventually, it took a long time, but the boys were eventually found innocent by the Supreme Court. So it was a big Supreme Court case, and these mothers went there and stood up for their kids who they knew were innocent. So it's a really intense, emotional story. And I want you to think about how art can really impact us emotionally, and how these techniques of the contrasting the light and the dark, and how we're using shading, how artists are bringing us into the scene, how it affects us emotionally, and also how art can play a role in history. Like, think about how this is different of maybe the photographs of this incident were. Think about what the impact is. I think that, obviously photography is another kind of art medium, but how can they both serve a role in art history, and what do they do to us as a viewer when we're looking at them? And you can learn more about the artist and the incident from the links. This is a Mexican artist, not living. He died in 1964. It's Gerardo Coronado. And this is from a volcano. This is charcoal, so the medium that we'll be using. And I really wanted to show you this to show you what charcoal can do. It can create a lot of texture and a lot of subtle shading. I mean, the difference between the darks in the foreground and then these, puffs of cloud and smoke that are coming out of the volcano. Coronado is creating so much different value from dark to light here. And I would consider this a low-key lighting situation where it's really dark, right? Because the volcano is erupting and it's making the sky really dark. The scene is really dark, but we're still getting a big contrast between values where we're seeing some lights and some darks. So I would just want you to notice what charcoal can do. It's an incredible medium, and it can be used to just start sketching, or it can be used to create something like this, which is a final piece. But this artist, I don't know exactly how this was created, but you could potentially make this in person while you're looking at it, because charcoal is so lightweight and you can do it on paper. Okay, so your sketch, this is what we're going to be doing: value scales. You're going to experiment with charcoal by creating 2 value scales. And this is how you're going to warm up with the charcoal. We're going to use these value scales in your larger projects, so don't get rid of them. Don't throw them out. Make sure to keep them because you need them later. So you're going to make a low contrast and a high contrast value scale. And I'm going to demonstrate that at the end of this video. If you don't have charcoal yet, it's okay, or you don't want to buy charcoal, it's okay if you use pencil for this too. You can make a value scale really with any medium. It's a good, exercise to do. I'll do the demo at the end of this. I just want to go over your project so you can understand what you're doing for your project. Okay, you're going to do 2 value drawings, 1 high contrast and 1 low contrast. So you're going to pick a fruit or vegetable. I'll be using an apple, and you're going to be drawing that same fruit or vegetable in both drawings. So you're going to use lighting to make one be high contrast and then one be low contrast. So you're going to switch up your lighting. I'll show you, I'm going to demonstrate how to do it in another video. If you can't use charcoal, pencil is totally fine. And I want you in the high contrast drawing to display chiaroscuro. So we looked at a lot of examples of it, so you can go back into the video, or you can download the PDF, which is in this assignment, to look at those images again. And I also want you to create volume in both drawings by using shading to make it look 3-dimensional, right? That's the illusion that we're going to try to create. You're going to make your fruit or vegetable look 3D on this 2D surface of the paper with shading. So this is my little shading guide, my egg. I did not make this up. A professor a long time ago just showed this to us, and I just redrew it. to make it, I did it in pen to make it easy to see when I was taking scans. So we can see the light source coming from the top, and the light source is going to create the highlight, which is your brightest bright in your image, your whitest white in the image. And then the cast shadow on the bottom, where the shadow below the egg, and it's like a cast on a surface, on a table or whatever, that's why it's called a cast shadow, that's the darkest dark. The core shadow is also really dark too. So that's kind of what we're going to be looking at. Then around the core shadow is midtones. And then underneath the midtone, where the cast shadow is, this reflected light. Now, reflected light is so important to make things look realistic. A lot of people don't use reflected light, and this is what's reflecting off the surface back onto the object. In this case, it's the egg. And we can see, if we go back to the Ninja Turtles, you can see on little baby Jesus's arm, on the bottom, there's a little reflected light on the bottom of the arm that is making it look more three-dimensional. So I think a lot of artists, if you want to make it look realistic, right, which is what we're doing, a lot of artists don't add that reflected light, and it could be a style choice, but I want you to think about how that can make it look, it's called turning the form, can make it look actually like it's turning in space and three-dimensional. Don't worry, I'm gonna show you how to do this in the next video. So another tip that I put on this is if you're drawing your shading lines in the direction of the form. So if it's a circular object, you're making those circular rounded lines. That also helps turn the form, make it volumetric, make it look three-dimensional. All right, the project demo for that will be in the project assignment page. And then we're gonna move on to the sketch demo now. For this sketch demo, I'll be doing the value scales. I'm using a drawing paper. It's this one here, which is has a bit of a texture on it, which will hold the charcoal nicely. You can use charcoal paper, you can use pastel paper, you can use a mixed media paper, you can use computer paper, really whatever you want. It's not a big deal. What I do recommend is that you use the paper that you're going to be using for your project drawings. So it is good to do this kind of value scale or preparation work on the same surface that you're doing your final drawing, so that the charcoal and the medium will look the same. First thing we're going to do is create a row of boxes, and you can use a ruler, you can do it by eye. I'm just going to create a rectangle here. If you don't have a ruler and you want to make a straight line, I'm not particular about straight lines, but a nice hardcover book also makes straight lines, and this does not have to be perfect by any means. Now we're going to divide up this rectangle into about 5 sections, 5 to 7 sections. Usually value scales can be anywhere from 5 to 10. So I'm just going to eyeball it. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think that should be good for now. And again, this is not perfection, but if you're a person that needs to make it perfect, go right ahead and measure them. You know, everyone has their own way of working, and this is really just for you. You can always add another square on. I'm gonna make a second one because we're doing 2. And then I'll just use these lines that I've already made to help me on my second one. You know, so this is an exercise that's great to learn about the material, but it's also something that's going to help you with your final drawing. So I always want you to find ways of working that make sense for you. All right, now we're going to get into the charcoal, and I'm using these charcoal pencils. You can use the charcoal sticks or whatever you have. These are like medium and soft I have somewhere here. So I'm just gonna stick with one pencil for now in case you're just working with one, and so you can see how that happens. You of course can use a range of charcoal sticks and pencils that you're gonna use for your final drawing and do the value through that. Now one side's gonna be the darkest and one side's gonna be the lightest. So this first one I'm gonna do high contrast. And we're going dark to light. So this is going to help us in our drawing, finding our darkest darks and our lightest lights. So I always start at either end. And now you can really start to see what the medium does. So you can see I'm going in all different directions, filling this up, getting it as dark as I can get it. And I'm just going all different angles to get this really, really dark. So the value scale is going to help us in our drawing make comparisons to what the darkest part of the drawing is and the lightest part of the drawing. Sorry, I'm shaking the table a lot. And then if you have your little, this guy, the smudger, I know they have a fancy name. You know, this could be where you get in really dark, or maybe some of it, the boxes are a good place to like test out textures. You know, you definitely want to leave some of the texture here, and then in another area you can see where it's completely black. And then the light, since this is high contrast, we want the light to be super light. And then we're gonna go everything in between. So I'm gonna start the next one the same as that, and then just add and then do this the same and add another layer going a different direction. I think you can all see how this is going, and I can always go back and adjust, you know, if I'm like, oh, that one needs to be darker to fit into my scale. So every scale, you can make scales relative to every drawing that you make, and it's gonna help you pick the tones and make sure you're getting the contrast that you want. You know, some people make these for every drawing. It's a great way not only to get the tonal variations, the values, the light and dark, but also to test out your materials. You know, you could have 3 or 4 different pieces of charcoal and you could be naming them, you know, you could have soft, hard, medium, and you could be naming them all and understanding how they all work. So even with all drawing, painting, everything, I always do these kind of exercises where I'm testing out the material on the same surface, the same paper that I'm going to be doing my final on. As you saw some of our artists do like that in the Kath Kollwitz, she's testing the material on the side. I'm forgetting which way I went, but it doesn't really matter when you start to get in here. So we can see this is a simple value scale, dark to light. You can go back in and make different ones. So that's with charcoal. Now we're doing low contrast. And I'm gonna do dark to light again. But now with the low contrast, I don't want, you can either choose it to be in the dark range, in the mid range, so this is mid, and or in the low, you know, highlight range. So I could pick one of these and start off here. And it really is going to depend on your drawing. You don't really have to pick what you're going to do for your drawing now. I just want you to practice one of these. And again, you could be doing this in pencil if you wanted to. So I'm going to actually show you a pencil. Okay, I'm going to start from dark. So I have a 3B, just in case some of you want to do this in pencil. And you could also do it with the point of the pencil or the side, but the side is going to help you fill out that shading more. And this is the HB. And this is where we can see the difference in the material of the 3B and the HB. I'm going to mix them together. So I'm going to call this 3B plus HB. I do this in every drawing and every piece of art I make. All right, and then so this is low contrast, so we're not making it really different on each one. It's not a big range. And I am going to have to go back in and adjust some of these. And see how I'm making the lines further apart? That's like for more highlights, letting some of the white of the paper show through. Okay, I'm going to make this a little darker because I think it needs to be a little closer, and I'm going to add a little more 3B into it. And you can see you don't have to color in the lines. This is really an exercise for you. And then I'm just gonna have, these are all HB. I like to make notes, you know, it is a little bit scientific, so you're keeping record of what you're doing, because I used to not be so great about doing this stuff, not making notes, and then I do something that I really like and I wouldn't be able to recreate it. So out of that frustration, I started doing stuff like this. And I feel like a lot of my teaching is to help my students not go through that frustration I've gone through, and have these tools. If this stuff drives you crazy, you can erase it. It's actually good to practice erasing. And you can see some of the subtractive techniques that you can use, which is subtractive technique is basically erasing, where you could do like a highlight in there. I think this white one's gonna work a little better, where you can erase some of the charcoal. Anyway, that's it. These are your value scales. And you're gonna make at least two, one high contrast, one low contrast. And the low contrast, there's not as much difference. It's not as large of a range between the dark and the light. And the high contrast is a really big range. Like this is super dark and this is super light. And you're going to use these in your drawings for your project for this week. So make sure to hold on to them and have fun with it. You really can't do this wrong. So it's just about experimenting with the materials.